Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining me today as we continue our weekly discussions based on the book, The Integral Human Being. It is such an honor to be here to be able to discuss a little bit about the psychological series or psychology collections that Joanna de Angelis, in close collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco, wrote in this 16-book series. We are in our second book, The Integral Human Being, as I mentioned before. But let's think about it, right? Why is it so important for us to study those week by week on chapter by chapter basis? Well, Joanna de Angelis created this bridge between spiritism and depth psychology. We're going to talk a little bit about this today. And we want to know more from her, from the entire enormity of the history of psychology, and in this case, specifically depth psychology. And with that, we can understand better what are some issues and some therapies that are provided. If we considerable, I'm sorry, if we consider how vulnerable we are, I'm eating words today. This is a moment that humanity as a whole is undergoing a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and this book to me is just a gift to us because it discusses not the symptoms but the root causes, and in many cases the solutions to our psychological issues or lack of emotional and mental well-being. So our focus is, as I say always, to bring in this weekly forum what are the topics discussed in this book, and the ultimate goal is for all of us to ask ourselves, how do I ensure I have the balance, the stability, and the emotional maturity despite of everything that's going around me? But let's go ahead and get started. And just a few more minutes before we go over this. We are here, as you can see, there are 9 parts in 40 chapters, and we're going to work today in psychological transformation. That's the topic. We are just getting close to the end. We're past beyond the halfway mark, and just remember the topics are just wide in terms of the variety, right? But they form some sort of crescendo because every time we study a new chapter, it gives another layer to understand the the theme, which is how can we as human beings achieve our sense of individuation and become an integral human being. So this is my invitation to you. If you cannot listen to me now, do listen to me later at our Solitude Center for Spiritual Living YouTube channel, because we're here exploring together this themes, right, that are really based on whatever the theme is from two lenses, the spiritism and depth psychology lens. But let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Psychological transformation. What are we talking about? Well, if we think about, we often find ourselves asking questions such as, why do I have to suffer so much? Or what is the root cause of all of our afflictions? In fact, this preoccupation, those questions are part of psychology, the field of psychology as a whole for a long time. And I wrote in the slide, let me read it to you because it's way too small for you to read, most likely, if you're not in front of a computer. Joanna says this: there was a preoccupation in the field of psychology for a long time to find the root of all problems that afflict humankind in order to solve them. All right, so you need to know the root cause so we can solve. And she continues, particularly those from the recent past that were related to prenatal life, childhood, and adolescence. So let's go into talk a little bit about this idea of psychology transformation, right? So if we think about it, there was a need to understand the root cause of our pains. There's important for us to understand, especially how these, and I'm talking about plural, but how the root cause relate to our prenatal childhood and adolescence. And often enough, they lead to an insistent desire to understand to all of us, if you're a psychologist or not, but to all of us, to understand why is it so difficult and often oppressive to live with those pains that we don't really know where they come from. Well, if I were to ask you, what would you tell me? What would be your conclusion? Well, apparently, in our zest to come to conclusion, and they're often rushed, we don't kill me for saying this, but it's almost a caricature, right? We blame our parents, especially if our parents are unfit parents, either because they're overprotective, right? Or they're too aggressive, or they're negligent, they're indifferent, etc. So it's an easy form for us to say, oh, I am suffering because of my parents. While we can predict how their behaviors can lead to a number of complexes, if we blame our family dysfunctions, our own dysfunctions as well, to our parents, it's just a way to shift focus from one challenging area to another without actually solving it or addressing it even. The problem with this picture is that, say, from a psychotherapist or psychologist perspective, is when they find those patients, is that they inadequately treat them, and as such, those patients often develop resentment against their parents, who's, those resentments apparently because they feel they are responsible, your parents, our parents, for their afflictions, which just means we are transferring from one pathological position to another. That's all. We're just shifting the blame and it goes around and around. So if you were to put in a continuum, you feel some sort of pain, we blame our parents, we become resentful, right? We create some sort of resentment. And interesting enough, we try with living with resentment to reaffirm our own personalities, right? Hope you understand what I'm talking about here. But basically, this chain of reaction and resentment grow into resentment against, well, my parents first, but then I transferred to my family, my relatives, my teachers, right? My any figure of authority out there. And I end up transferring without noticing. It's just a very automatic trigger from our minds to society as a whole. Oh boy. Now we're talking about a much larger issue where the dysfunctions of a family have an indirect impact to how we as a society behave. Joanna de Angelis, she addresses this issue of an unfit society, right? She states that the neurotic phenomena of society, stemming from our own sense of inadequacy, should lead us to not only seek self awareness, but most importantly, she says, to not turn it into a mechanism for further hurt and pain. Right? What is she talking about? So remember the chain. from pain to a society that is unfit. Well, Joanna advises to not unload onto our parents the blame and responsibility for a lack of emotional well-being. So it's a really strong statement, right? But instead, she she gives this much more gentle advice, a little hard to get, but she does anyways. She advises that we seek our psychological maturity. And she says that basically that achieving this state of being psychologically mature will prevent us to get stuck in a position of the world is unfair, right? I'm not well because, and often taking refuge to justify all our failures into this idea of being a victim. And really, there is no question about the environmental impact to our psychological formation and our psychological development from the day we're born, right, to the point where we are faced with the inadequacies of our parents and the family upbringing. And the world we live in is right largely a world of aggression, hatred, conflicts, violence. You get it, right? It's just a world not in peace. And those behaviors, from a societal perspective, are just a few reactions to the complexities of our lives as a whole. So let's just park there, let's pause, and bring another wrinkle to this discussion, which is if we indeed pause to consider our immortal spirit and the reality of reincarnation, we must admit that the causes of adverse circumstances to our psychological formation and development also come from what? Our past existence. These experiences from they are forming or adding, right, to the formation of the structure of our individuality. So as we face our current state, right, what is we are now reincarnated, and all of those experiences are here with me, and they're responsible for either our resilience or our fragility of all the emotional components of the structure of our personality, our individuality. In fact, we have example for instance, twins. They're really evidence of giving us this, but not only twins, but siblings or individuals that are living in very similar circumstances. And we're talking about social upbringing, right? Educational, even nutrition. If you think in terms of the disciplined approach to take care of a child and all of the societal expectations for the child, but they may be going through the same series of conditions, right? And yet we find, and there's large evidence to the fact that they deal with challenges and difficulties, difficult situations very differently. It is, we conclude, their own individual makeup, if you will. We can see that they react as they react because it is ingrained in their makeup and predates their birth, all of that they bring in. And we're talking about resilience or fragility, right? Overall, this is quite complex to understand and to be able to help those who are in pain. And I say that especially for those healthcare providers in the mental and emotional being areas. But The modern psychological perspective attempts to develop the latent possibilities of the individual, or in other words, one's potential. And they do this by focusing its interpretation on the unexplored resources. We should agree that there is a whole universe to conquer and expand within each one of us. And the discovery process should have the goal to release our inhibitions, to be able to dispel conflicts, and even to welcome the challenges related to self realization and inner maturity. Inevitably, we get to address our experiences and our upbringing, regardless of a difficult childhood, for example, right? Regardless of anything, we will eventually get to address them. So, achieving this psychological transformation, and I like to think of it as a metamorphosis of our past, is really key because it sheds light to conscious reason. And with it, that psychological transformation, we start to shift the responsibility to ourselves, right? It's our responsibility to look into our history without leaving behind the stickly, if you talk, I'm using the term because I think of it as a darkness, or even pathologically so shadows in our personalities. And I know this is an oversimplification. When we start to consider, for example, the cases of psychosis, neurosis, or difficulties, strong, especially difficulties in personal interrelationships. If we consider also sexual inhibition and all of the overall issues that some of us or most of us will have to go through. But Joanna de Angelis, in this chapter, she suggested that for those cases, it is possible to resort to regressions so that we can embark in this conscious voyage to the past. So what she's talking about is that we should look for ways to find, and she used the word karmic root to the issue, right, of the issue. And by karmic, we're now talking about this reference to the law of cause and effect, right? Action and reaction that we may have been bringing with us this something that we've done, and we are in a karmic process. We are taking that consequence of something that we've done in the past to today in a different experience. But let's think about it. If we choose to do so, we should also rely on specialized therapy to overcome those triggers and causes of our conditions. And we're talking about those pathological conditions, right? And she brings to us this idea that I wanted to read to you, which is the goal of the recently developed field of depth psychology. I told you we're going to talk about depth psychology today, is to unravel the variables of the human pathologies that affect the psychological behavior of human beings by means of a new language and the development of resources related to the evolutionary process of the patient that are not yet excogitated, meaning it has not brought forth. So it's quite interesting and quite good to understand that the conclusion that she brings to us is that therapeutical experience that we go through, that we embark on, requires technical resources and specialized professionals. So I wanted to just give us ourselves a time to pause as I'm going to my next slide, right, and understand that where we are today, and if we think about it, we're discussing depth psychology, and we we really come to a sense of uh, meaning, right? And let me just go to my next slide. I think will be best for us. And uh, if you agree with Joanna, right, and we're talking now about perhaps not just the required help from depth psychology, but the awareness. And think about it. She creates this idea that awareness has several layers, and the first one, which is meaning. Think about it. The idea of bringing meaning. But I love that thought. So I'm going to spend a few more minutes with you today. Um, because I agree with Joanna about that this world that appears to be changing at an ever increasing rate, and yes, it is not too difficult to accept that so many of us feel lost, we feel stressed. It is very difficult for all of us, right? And I wanted to introduce. A modern Greek philosopher, sorry. His name is Alex Patakos, and he's also known as Mr. Meaning. I love it. He is the co-founder of the Global Meaning Institute, and he also is a co-author along with Elaine Dundon on both cases. They co-authored the book Prisoners of Our Thoughts, Viktor Frankl's Principles for Discovering Meaning in Life and Work, right? A mouthful, a very long title, but as we talked many times, we made several references about Viktor Frankl. It's good to bring it back now, Alex and Elaine. But anyways, these two are pioneers in transformational thinking. And in the book, Prisoners of Our Thoughts, they both urge us to recognize that when we search out and we discover the authentic meaning of our existence and our experiences, we find that life doesn't just happen to us. We happen to life and we make it meaningful. I love that. And they remind us that human quest for meaning is grounded in awareness, right? And I put in the slide, I believe it's too small for you to read. It's there for you to look at later. But they say to be aware is to know meaning. To be aware takes time and effort, right? And why are they saying that? Well, because we are just distracted. We are so distracted because we have too many activities, or in a lot of cases, right? We are prey to that intrusion that is very subtle or may not be so subtle, but there's an intrusion of different media in our places, be it radio, be it printed media, be it television, social media, etc. And we just keep absorbing external inputs, right? And by doing that at a much larger frequency and amount, we miss the opportunity to pay attention and really find the meaning in our lives. I remember one day that I was watching a interpretation of Sherlock Holmes. This one was with, I believe, Robert Downey Jr. That he kind of tries to portray the idea of somebody that has this hyper sensitivity to details. And if we think about it, right, we as we look into our eye to something, our eyes grabs everything, but without focusing on something we would be lost. We wouldn't be able to do anything because nothing is at the forefront. And this is similar, in my opinion, to this idea of meaning. There's just too much. And so the, I don't know, the next door neighbor's account of a noise at night in those sites for neighborhoods, it becomes almost equally important as my meal last night, which is equally important to my lifelong work and legacy, say. And so we need to just say, no, 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 let's put into focus what we need to put into focus. And I'm not sure I'm adequately portraying what we're trying to do here, because they say something differently in terms of what they call meaningfulness. But let's just go back to what they say instead of what I'm saying. They they say, right, there are as many shades, and it's quite beautiful idea. There are as many shades of meaning as there are colors. All right. So if you study color theory, you know what I mean, what they mean by that, right? They also say nobody can determine meaning for someone else. And this is key for us to understand the complexities of our societies, of our families, etc. They also say that detecting the meaning of life's moments is an individual pursuit and an individual responsibility, right? So I cannot make my children, for example, start to pay more attention. That's their, I can talk about my pursuit, but it's their pursuit to do that. So, in so many words, we will not find meaning if we don't look for it. And we can't or will not be able to look for it if we're not aware of all the potentials that giving meaning to moments gives to us. So let's shift a little bit to the co-author of the book now, to Elaine Dundon. In her book, Seeds of Innovation, she offers that the first step in that transformational thinking, which is described as one of the building blocks of innovation, is increasing awareness. So you can see the themes, they start to connect. And we can think of the process of seeking great awareness of oneself, of others, and as well as the environment that we belong, right? And that environment can be the place we live, the place we work, the place of worship, our identity, and I'm talking about here cultural identity, where we're born, so on and so forth. So in many ways, this is akin to mindfulness, which is just that state of heightened awareness, right? But as I mentioned before, Elaine Dunn and Alex, they prefer to call meaningfulness. So I would like to read what she wrote, if you don't mind, to be more, completely correct in her words. It was a post in Psychology Today. She said, and I read, meaningfulness encourages us to go further, to transcend to a higher level by connecting with not just our thinking, but also with our emotions and, importantly, with our true nature. To know what is meaningful to us, we must discover and embrace our true nature or core essence. You start to see what she's saying, right? It's not an easy task, but let's keep going. So she moves on to say, our core essence is what defines us and is at the heart of what makes us a unique human being. It is our core essence that frames our sense of self to help us clarify and understand our purpose, leading to a more joyful and deeply authentic life. Pause for me to drink a bit of water, and we keep moving, right? Um, our core essence lies at the deepest origins of our spirit, beyond the cognitive, beyond thinking. Understanding our emotions and our true nature or core essence helps us become more aware of our connections to others, to nature, and to broader universal consciousness. Thank you, Elaine Dundon, for such beautiful words. And I believe this is an invitation through her words to open ourselves to being aware of the many possibilities in life. And when we do that, we really start to open ourselves to this sense of having meaning in our lives. And it is life itself that calls us, right? Not just Elaine Dundon. And life invites us to discover meaning and live our lives with awareness. I'd love to stop it here, but we're going to keep going because Joanna de Angelis keeps going as well. So let's keep on going with our thought processes. So the invitation is to express meaning in everything we do, right? So if we're having breakfast, and those are my words, right? If we're having breakfast, let's put meaningful to that act of nourishing our body, be it through, say, many of us sit and take time to prepare breakfast. We will stop to offer prayer of gratitude before we have breakfast. We sit, we're aware of the taste, we're aware of all the nourishments that we receive in our body. We can also talk about meaning when we're traveling, and the travel is not just, oh, I'm crammed in a small seat, a very narrow airplane, and I'm just tired and I'm exhausted. No, it's just the adventure traveling, the ability to be, and it can be walking, driving, on a bicycle, on an airplane, right? What are the sensory inputs that we're receiving from traveling? What are we learning? How we are excited about it to get into a new experience, because this is all about the experience. Or on a third instance, as an example that comes to my mind is perhaps if I am at an exhibit of Picasso, as the very famous sculptor and painter, I'd say the most famous painter and sculptor of the 20th century, right? But if we're there and we look and we are viewing this Picasso, what does it tell you? Let's bring meaning to that face to face, if you will, to a work of art, and how does it elicit emotions to me? On a different note, I just love. There's several videos out there, but there's one video in particular that really touched me, which was, as we know, the Guernica by Picasso, right, post-war painting, black and white, and it's enormous, and it sits at the Prado Museum, and they filmed a flamenco dance in front of that. So layers of Spanish culture right there. And it was just the most exquisite, the most beautiful video out there. Hope you can see it, right? But the beauty of all of this thought processes is the more aware we are, the more likely we can start to see the patterns in our thoughts, our words, our behaviors, and these patterns that we start to find and really identify their evidence of that individual structure, right? And determine how we face our daily challenges, how we react to those challenges, those conflicts. But in any case, I just wanted to bring to you the sense that if you go from meaning to awareness, right, that awareness expresses itself as an attitude toward life that's written there, a process of unraveling oneself, whom one is, where one is, later followed by the analysis, this is all Joanna, right, of what one knows, how much one still ignores, as individuals equip themselves with a lucidity that rejects avoidance coping mechanism. And and that coping mechanism of avoidance is something that Joanna talks a lot in her book. In fact, existential conflict. I believe, she begins the book. It's either chapter one or chapter two, right there, as she talks about emptiness and that avoidance as a mechanism. So it's something that is quite important for us to understand when she talks about awareness. But in any case, it's important for us to understand that we are indeed, not to understand, to accept, right? We are strangers to ourselves. Our self perception, right? And this is crazy thought of mine, but our self perception, it's like maybe you're buying or purchasing a very, very complicated equipment, a machine that the functions are so difficult for you to be able to truly benefit from what the machine or the equipment does. And there is, yes, a product engineer, a product designer that has the intention of not only simplifying those functions but to automate it, but they have not done it yet. So it becomes a puzzle. It becomes a matter of us translating what does it do, this function, this equipment and those functions, and our inability to really master that. That's how I see ourselves. And if we start to conclude this topic, right, this chapter, we come to this conclusion of how urgent and indispensable for us to become aware of ourselves. And I say that because I would love to be that product designer, right, that is so smart, knows so well the equipment. It's metaphor for us that it can simplify, it can automate, it can make all the joints and issues that we may have in the equipment go away. This is what we should do. Let us all welcome this sense of self-awareness. And this process is, we are told, independent of our intelligence levels, right? So if we start to really dive deeper into the idea of awareness, right, we may start to think about that there are moments of awareness that are there, but there are some others that if you want to dive into your self awareness, they require exercise, right? And they require that exercise becomes accepted, right, to all of us. So Joanna again urges us to not delay this pursuit for awareness. And she says, hold on, all of us, do it now, but do not become fixated with your past. Because when we start to see today, it today reflects our past, right? So she said, please do not become fixated with our past because it can lead to a sense of resentment, as we talked before, or a sense of victimization. So she said, just do it without delay, but watch how you do it. And with that, it comes to my mind that it's so important for us, like in anything in life, to have balance, to have moderation, which is much like learning how to swim. According to Peter Ouspensky, right? He says, you just keep trying. The baby you put in swimming pool with time, he learns how to swim and one day perhaps become an Olympian like, my favorite, Michael Phelps, right? But Ouspensky was a Russian philosopher, also is famous for saying, you cannot learn to swim when you fall into the sea during a storm. So think about it, right? What he's saying is, as we go through this journey of self awareness, yes, you learn how to swim, but if things are too complex, let's just hold on or seek help until we're ready to do it on your own, right? So finally, we get here to this idea of the fourth way. And Joanna will bring reference to the fourth way at another book, and I'm trying to remember which one, and I believe it's The Conscious Being, a beautiful, beautiful book. Forgive me if it's not. I may be misquoting here, but Joanna discusses the fourth way quite well. And back to Ouspensky, right? He was the one who created the term fourth way. And this concept is quite central to his own teaching of the ideas of Gurdjieff. Who's Gurdjieff? George Ivanovich Gurdjieff was a 20th century, another modern century 20th century modern philosopher, right? He is considered a mystic, a spiritual teacher. He was also a composer. He was also a dancer or a dance teacher, right? But he taught that people are not conscious of themselves. Yeah. And because of that, we, I'm part of this, live our lives in a state of hypnotic waking sleep. And he also says that it is possible to awaken, all of us to be awakened to a higher state of consciousness and serve our purpose as human beings. I really love this. But Gurdjieff also, and I put down into the slide, proposed that there are three ways of self development, right? Three ways. The way of the fakir, dealing exclusively with our physical body, the way of the monk, dealing with the emotions, and the way of the yogi, dealing with the mind. So, body, emotions, and mind, and what is common about those three ways, he says, right, is that they demand complete seclusion from the world. If you really want to be to deal with your body in his teachings, you should not be immersed in this social world that we live in, emotions yoga, because it gets too complicated. It becomes like that storm, right? But according to Gurdjieff, there is a fourth way which does not demand, if you're seeking that type of higher state of consciousness, there is a fourth way that does not require us to abandon the world. And the work of self development takes place right in the middle of ordinary everyday life. And the fourth way, just to real quickly to finish here, is where a person learns to work in harmony with his physical body, his emotions, and mind. Beautifully said, Mr. Gurdjieff. But, anyways, let's keep going. And I'm bringing, you know, back to the beginning of the chapter, highlight resentment. And I'm going to read what Joanna talks about it. She says, in psychology, resentment is a complex emotional reaction to being wronged or mistreated by another person, situation, or series of events. It can feel like a combination of emotions, including anger, bitterness, disgust, disappointment, and disapproval. Resentment, she continues, can be triggered by a slight injustice or a more serious one, and it can persist over time. What we must not forget is that we see ourselves as resentful individuals. We somehow have become victims of the conflicts, regardless of their magnitude. So let's change that. Let's learn to address, let's learn to solve the actual problem or challenge behind our conflicts, right? Let's free ourselves from the worries of our past, free ourselves from any trauma that was left behind. Let's create new opportunities. Let's start a new future right now. I want to also, let me see, I think I got another slide. Yes, I did. So I wanted to bring here, and in the slide, I also wrote some words from Joanna, but let's think about it, right? The social psychological structure is the sum of the cultural, historical, political, and religious experience. So it's everything. That structure drives the repressive functions to the human behavior. So if we think about it, the answer to our well-being is actually to free ourselves, and we can become free when we become mature. So we are required, and I say that before I move on, right? It's that the maturity that comes in our lifetime, our physical lifetime, with the maturity of our personality, where a mother who hears a 3-year-old child saying, I hate you, mom, because the child cannot have ice cream for dinner, right? And the maturity comes when the mother says, okay, right? There is the proportion of that statement is accepted with the proportion of the maturity of the adult in this relationship. But anyways, we are really required to remove fear, to remove anger, remove ambition, right? Those are all, I would say, egoic reactions to what goes on around us, because often those are what Joanna loves to call atavic inheritance. We inherited those reactions from our past lives, and we bring in our personal unconscious, as Freud calls it, and it's there to just erupt until we attain that psychological maturity. So, if you think about it, we are called upon to create this evolutionary program and enjoy this adventure and welcome all the unexplored possibilities of our lives. So, in so many words, and I'm going to read Joanna's words, awareness of the potential for transformation foments an open mind with the ability to engage all the facts of existence with clarity and health, steering the individual to a serene behavior and the possibilities of accomplishing the infinite. How about that? So, with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being with me. And as we wrap up this conversation, I invite you to join me next week when we discuss our next chapter. And next week, we begin the seventh part of the book, Achieving Inner Plenitude. And we're going to be focused on sexual problems. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you allowing me to discuss Joanna de Angelis, the integral human being. So long.